do you know your damage? Like, really know your damage? Most people don't, and I'm actually seeing now with the new strikers as well, a lot of content creators that clearly don't know their damage, and they're advising things which are, how do I put this politely? Dribble. Pure, utter, unadulterated dribble. So I'm going to put my normal DPS build on for this, and hopefully we can show you, as there's more than one of me, I'm not that screwed up, hopefully I can show you why when you look at your weapon you will see one number, but when you shoot it you'll see another. So here it says 12.8k or 112.8k, but we have 120% all weapon damage. All weapon damage, or AWD, or just WD, is your only additive stat. There are a few others, and I will have to do a follow-up video to probably go through all of these. However, when you look at your weapon damage, it will give you, like for example, on my shield splinter it's 112.8k. This is made up by all of my red cores, as you can see here, like weapon damage, my optimization, etc, etc. The actual assault rifle damage on it as well, additive. It goes the same for things like foxes, which got rifle damage on, Fenris pieces, again, that will be additive. The way in which it's additive is it just simply works from base. For example, a shield splinter at base is 45,132 with 120% all weapon damage. 20% of that is from my optimizations, recalibrations, expertise. There we are, I'll get there at the end. I then have 15% from my specialization, and the assault rifle itself is maxed out with 15% AR damage on it. In total that works out to 150%. If I work out 150% and add that back onto the base, I end up with 112,830. There's my 112.8k on the AR. So that is how that is calculated. It is just your pure weapon cores. There are a few talents that will increase this, such as Optimist works from base. It increases our weapon damage, not our total weapon damage. Total weapon damage itself is a multiplier, and we'll be going into this in a bit. So why was it that despite the fact that we have 112.8 weapon damage, or total weapon damage, why is it that when we shoot the target we're hitting things like 1,000,000? Why? What's going on? What is actually pushing our damage that high? What's going on behind the scenes? This video is not to actually teach you all the calculations, because I'm aware that will be very boring. And already this video, for what I have planned, is shaping up to be quite boring. Anyway, it's also going to be quite lengthy, which I do apologise for. So we're going to look at what happens behind the scenes on your weapon damage to maybe explain a little bit of why your damage numbers are the way they are, as well as what do people mean when they say additive and multiplicative, and varying different interactions that some of these actually have. There are weird nuances within them, such as things like obliterate. It is multiplicative. However, when you have other forms of total weapon damage, it will add to them. So vigilance and obliterate at both at max, so vigilance is active and you're at max stacks with obliterate, these will add together to give you 50%. This is a 50% multiplier, whereas if you have something like glass cannon and vigilance, these will times together, giving you 56%. 1.25 times 1.25, you then minus the 1, that is a 0.56 0.25. I'm pretty sure the game will not go into that 25 part, so you will just get 56%. This is why, depending on the combination that you are using, glass cannon, more often than not, despite the fact that it is at base, if you literally have nothing else going on, glass cannon and obliterate are both 25%. The difference is in how they interact with other things. I will be doing a follow-up video where I'm going to try and go over every chest and backpack talent and explain this, and then I'm going to have to do another one probably for weapons, and then hopefully that will show what weapon talents are worth it and what ones kind of aren't, but that's a story for another day. For the time being, I am afraid to say we have some hefty spreadsheeting to do. I'm going to try and keep this simple as possible, but despite the fact that I may say add or multiply, the easiest way to find things using decimals is adding. Where that arrow is denoting now, that is pure additive. Most of the equation is done with adding, so I'm adding the numbers together, which will give me 1.5 for example, and then that is times. This part here is multiplicative. Notice how it's a lot more complicated, and if enough people want to learn how to do this, then we can go into doing this at another time. However, the main things you need to know here is we have AWD, all weapon damage, spec, which is from your specialization, and then we have weapon. This is when you look at your actual weapon that you currently have equipped, it will say the top attribute, 15% AR damage, LMG damage, etc, etc. That's what that is. In that column as well will be things like if you have a Fenris piece, so that will put it from 0.15 to 0.25, or contractors, etc, etc. You have to denote it correctly though. Just because you have contractors on, if you're using an AR, that won't go into weapon. It does require a little bit of common sense. This gives you your test base, which is what you see on your screen. After this, after your test base, everything is multiplicative. In order to get your correct test base, you must add in everything. You will be surprised what affects your test base. Obliterate affects your test base. The first part of measured affects your test base. There are so many things, you have to read the little nuances, and annoyingly some of them are not correct, and this is the part where I'm still learning and have had many mess ups in the past. Yet again, shout out Hutchler and Dispatch for correcting them despite how much of a dick I was being. Anyway, I'm hoping in this little snippet here you will see that the outcomes of them are the exact same. Their damages at the far end are the exact same. However, you might notice that the top one, there's nothing in total weapon damage, or TWD, but in AMP 1 there's a 0.25. that would be glass cannon. In TWD we have 0.25. that would be obliterate. The only difference between these two at base is one needs to stack up and the other one tries to get you killed. When we then start adding in vigilance, for example, we will actually get this. See, vigilance is total weapon damage as well, so that will go into TWD. AMP 1 still has glass cannon on the top build, so that will be, just at base, will be 0.25 times detox times damage to armor times our headshot for headshots. If we crit, it will be times our crit, and then it's times total weapon damage. However, the bottom one is 0.25. This is because all forms of total weapon damage add together, which will be 0.5. So that's 0.5 times your crit times your headshot, depending, etc, etc. And you should see by the end equations that glass cannon with vigilance will do a lot more than obliterate with vigilance. Again, this is a completely made up build, so don't take the end result numbers to be factual, just the equations. There are a lot more nuances and interactions than people seem to think. And different things will scale in different ways depending on how you use them. This then comes into the argument of, well, Fenris versus Grupo. Well, Fenris is additive, Grupo would be multiplicative. From just that base level alone, what one do you think gives more damage? Admittedly, yes, it will also then depend on your overall crits, and then to find out the true perspective of it, you need to look into the total DPS. Why would we need to do this? Well, Fenris is going to affect everything from your crits to your non-crits, and it's also then going to be subject to multipliers down the line, whereas Grupo is only going to be affected by your crits and other multipliers when you crit. If you don't crit, it's getting nothing. So you need to use a little bit of common sense. Am I still allowed to say that word? This then kind of leads into the fact that we have 3 damage types, and this is one that always really confuses me. Now, it might seem a bit weird to say that we actually have 3 damage types in the game. Well, we actually do, and most people will be using 2 of them willy-nilly because someone somewhere correctly said that they are the meta. These are best in slot. Contractors, foxes, and then the side one, which no one seems to know or care about, is good old Hollow Man. Okay? If you're in the know, you know what I'm on about already. Damage to armor. This is effectively our first element. It is a conditional multiplier that will only be applied when we hit armor. See that white bar on that guy? That's armor. Yeah. We then have damage to targets out of cover. Guess what? This is a conditional element for enemies that are out of cover. We then have damage to health. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we can see where this is going. Now, there will be different nuances on what actually health is applied to. However, one thing that I do see a lot is because people go, oh, this thing hits the health, therefore it means it's damage to health. No, it doesn't. Everything is damage to health, everything is damage to armor, and everything is damage to targets out of cover. We then have 3 separate stats that help bolster this. An easy way to find this out is to see if they scale with those stats. I can tell you now that no skills in the game will scale with damage to health. None. So no skill in the game is inherently damage to health. Does this mean it can't damage an enemy's health? No, it doesn't. Because damage is damage. You don't necessarily need damage to armor. I'm not running any damage to armor on this build, and yet when I shoot them in the armor bar, they still take damage. So therefore, everything is damage to armor. But if I had a perk for damage to armor, then I would do more damage to their armor, and when that armor was depleted, you would see a noticeable drop-off on my damage. As it stands, I'm using an AR, which has damage to health on it. So when I actually remove their armor, my damage actually goes up, because damage to health is another multiplier altogether. We then have damage to targets out of cover. Why is this considered to be the most powerful stat in the game? Well, to put it simply, the only condition is to get them out of cover. Doesn't matter whether they have health or armor or a big cuddly teddy bear on their forehead. If they're out of cover, you are now under that condition for damage to targets out of cover, and you will get a hefty multiplier. It is just quite simply the best because it's the easiest to apply in all situations. Damage to armor, damage to health, damage to targets out of cover, glass cannon, obliterate, crit damage, headshot damage. All of their damage stats are applied in the exact same way. At base, with nothing else going on, and if you were able to keep them all separate, 1% total weapon damage is the exact same amount as 1% critical hit damage, or headshot damage, or damage to armor, or health damage, or even if it was glass cannon amplified. They are all applied in the exact same way. What differs between them is their interactions between each other and the condition in which they can interact. For example, a good way to know this is damage to health and damage to armor cannot interact. So if you're doing spreadsheet equations and you're not getting the right damage numbers, this is the first thing I do, is I have a look at damage to health and I have a look at damage to armor to see if I have them both active, because they cannot be both active. Damage to health and damage to targets out of cover can interact. Quite simple. A Chunga, because he will not take cover unless you're in a raid Chungas take cover. Because Chungas don't take cover, you will always be subject to both damage to health and damage to targets out of cover. He's always out of cover and he is pure health. Damage to armor and damage to targets out of cover. That guy right there, if I was actually able to hit my shots, he would be subject to damage to armor and damage to targets out of cover, because he had armor and he was out of cover. Depending on the rate in which Obliterate builds up, it will multiply with these stats as well. If I get crits or if I get non-crits, if I get a headshot or if I don't get a headshot, it all depends on the conditional amount that you are able to produce in order to calculate your total damage. This is why, if you are going to go into spreadsheets, and for those that bully spreadsheets saying they're not accurate, yes they are. Spreadsheets are actually 100% accurate 100% of the time. If you're not getting the number you want, it's because you are doing something wrong. We do have trouble calculating DPS. Why do we have trouble calculating DPS? Well, two reasons. It's very hard to actually put into the equation your accuracy. Missed bullets do not count towards DPS, so every DPS equation we do will assume that you have a 100% accuracy. There are ways to drop this down. I won't be doing that because, to put it bluntly, I'm not that bloody good. And then there's crit. Whenever I do crit calculations for my DPS, I just assume that 60% will mean 60%. Although this is not a particularly bad way to go, it is also not the best either. This means that out of a 50 round mag, 60% of it I am in my equation saying will, quote unquote, will crit. This at least gives me a decent baseline of where I'm then able to work from. It's not going to be accurate. It's helpful for me. Might be helpful for you to, if you're going into this, to sort of see where you're going. But overall, the interactions between the individual multipliers and the additives and everything else you have going on in the build to show single shot damage or stacking damage and the overall effect of your damage is 100% accurate. We are able to show this repeatedly, time and time again. We can test it on a spreadsheet, we can test it in the range, and we can test it in the open world. Anyway, wanted to kind of get this out of the way because my strikers maths is killing me and I needed a quick break, as well as the fact that I'm also seeing so many videos from so many people that are just dribbling over strikers. Oh, it's not that complicated. I've seen people saying Obliterate is doing more than it should be with strikers. No, it's not. Oh, but they're both total weapon damage, yes, but one's from a gear piece, one's from a gear set. For some dumb reason, these two act as completely separate entities. Is it a bug? I don't think so, because it worked the exact same way with the original strikers, so this is nothing new. Anyway, hopefully that clears up some of your damage thinkings and the way certain things will interact, etc, etc, as well as the fact of varying misnomers about spreadsheets. They're bloody right. I'm not saying I'm right, I'm saying the spreadsheet's right. And if I've done something wrong on the spreadsheet, that's a me thing. Doesn't mean the spreadsheet's wrong. Spreadsheet's right, it just had an idiot typing the wrong thing in. Anyway, have fun, good luck, don't die. It's bad for the health.